Who am I? Where did my family really come from? These are probably the most human questions we can ask. For centuries, we've looked to stories, to legends, to family trees for the answers. But today, there's a new kind of history book, one that's written inside every one of us, in our DNA. So today, we're going to dive into that story. We're going on a genetic journey deep into the past to uncover the origins of one of the world's most ancient and diverse populations.
It seems like such a simple question, right? But the answer is incredibly complex. The Indian subcontinent is home to over 1 billion people, with thousands of languages and countless different communities. But what if I told you that modern science is uncovering this hidden, shared story? A story that connects pretty much everyone, from the peaks of the Himalayas down to the Indian Ocean.
And that brings us to an even tougher, more sensitive question. A lot of people grow up with this idea that social structures, like caste, are ancient, that they're set in stone, and maybe, just maybe, that they're biological. That some groups of people are just fundamentally different from others. But what does the science actually have to say about that? Can you really find these identities written in our genetic code? Well, let's find out. Okay, so our genetic detective story, it starts thousands of years ago, right in the heart of one of the world's first great civilizations. This is where we find our first huge clue, hidden away in the bones of an ancient ancestor. Now, we're not talking about a few small villages here. The Indus Valley Civilization, or the IVC, was this incredible, sprawling network of super sophisticated cities. They had systematic town planning, complex drainage systems, they even had standardized weights and measures. It was a thriving, bustling hub of the ancient world. So the huge breakthrough came from a place called Rakhi Gari, one of the biggest IVC sites ever found. Scientists were able to map the entire DNA of a woman who lived there more than 4,500 years ago. And her genes? They told an amazing story. She wasn't from some single, pure group, not at all. Her ancestry was actually a blend of two very different, very ancient peoples. One group with deep, deep roots in the lands of ancient Iran, and another group related to the first hunter-gatherers of Southeast Asia. And this genetic recipe wasn't just hers. It looks like it was the standard mix across the entire civilization. But here's the twist. The Rakhi Gari genome was just as amazing for what it didn't have. There was a huge piece of the genetic puzzle missing, a genetic signature that is incredibly common across the northern half of India today. So where on earth did it come from? To find that missing piece, our story has to travel north, way up to the vast grassy plains of Central Asia. This is where a new group of people enters the picture, a group that would change the subcontinent's genetic landscape forever. So picture this. The Indus Valley Civilization is past its peak, and a new, slow but steady migration begins. People start moving into South Asia from the Central Asian steppe. And these folks weren't city dwellers. They were pastoralists, people who lived by herding animals across huge distances. So who were they really? Well, archaeologists know them as the Santashta and Andronovo cultures. They were chariot-riding pastoralists, and they brought with them the earliest forms of Indo-European languages. That's the language family that includes Hindi, Bengali, Punjabi, and even English. But crucially, they carried a very distinct genetic signature that you can trace all the way back to the Bronze Age people of Eastern Europe. And this was our missing ingredient. Okay, so let's just pause and put this all together. We've got our two main ancestral streams. On one hand, you have the people of the Indus Valley Civilization, a mix of ancient Iranian-related and Southeast Asian-related groups. And on the other hand, you have the newly arrived steppe pastoralists, carrying this completely different genetic heritage from the West. Two different worlds about to collide. And what happened next is, without a doubt, the most important chapter in India's entire genetic story. And it's not a story of replacement or conquest. It's a story of a profound and massive mixture. For the next 2,000 years, these populations, the descendants of the IVC people and the descendants of the steppe migrants, they intermarried. They mixed and mingled on a huge scale, creating this brand new, blended genetic fabric that became the foundation for virtually every single person living on the subcontinent today. And look, this isn't just some wild theory. The genetic evidence is absolutely overwhelming. As the lead researcher, David Reich from Harvard, puts it, this mixing was so widespread that it affected almost every group in India, even the most isolated tribal groups. It was a total demographic transformation. This timeline really helps to visualize what we're talking about. The Great Mixture kicks off around 4,200 years ago. By about 3,000 years ago, it's happening pretty much everywhere. But then, something dramatic changes. Around 1900 years ago, this long era of widespread mixing comes to a pretty sudden halt. So what was the result of all this mixing? Well, it essentially created two major ancestral populations. Geneticists call them Ancestral North Indians, or ANI, who are a mix of the original Indus Valley folks and the incoming steppe pastoralists. And then there are the Ancestral South Indians, or ASI, who are a bit closer to that original Indus Valley profile. But here's the key takeaway, the most important part. Nearly every group in India today is a mix of both of these ancestral populations, just in different amounts. Just think about that for a second. It doesn't matter if you're from the north or the south, a big city or a tiny village, your genes tell the story of connection, of mixing. This shared ancestry, not some ancient separation, is the common thread that runs through the entire subcontinent. So what on earth happened 1,900 years ago to bring this great mixture to a screeching halt? Well, this final chapter of our story reveals how a massive social shift completely reshaped India's genetic landscape all over again. The key to understanding this whole thing comes down to a single word: endogamy. It's basically the practice of marrying strictly within your own community. So instead of that free mixture that had defined the subcontinent for thousands of years, societies started to build walls. David Reich uses this really powerful image to describe what happened genetically. He says, endogamy set in and froze everything in place. It's like this free-flowing river of genes that had been mixing for 2 millennia was suddenly diverted into thousands of separate, isolated little pools. And the genetic data shows this wasn't some slow, gradual change. It was a really profound social transformation. There's a clear cutoff point. After this time, the rules about who could marry whom became way more rigid, and they were enforced across society.
And this timing, according to leading scientists like Lalji Singh, lines up with the formation of the caste system as we understand it today. The genetic evidence strongly suggests that this rigid social structure isn't some timeless ancient thing. It actually took shape, as he says, only relatively recently in Indian history. So let's just put all the pieces together. This big shift to endogamy led to the creation of thousands of smaller groups, or jatis, and each one had its own strict marriage rules. What this did genetically was it froze the specific recipe of ANI and ASI ancestry that each group had at that exact moment in time. And for almost 2,000 years since then, these groups have stayed as largely separate genetic pools. And that's what creates the incredibly complex and unique genetic landscape we see in India today.
So, let's go back to that original question. Are identities like caste written in our genes? Well, the science is pretty clear on this. The foundational story of India is not one of ancient, pure, separate groups. It is a story of a massive, continent-wide mixture of very different peoples. The separation, the walls, that all came much, much later. And that leaves us with one last, powerful question to think about. If our own genes show us that pretty much everyone on the subcontinent is connected by this shared story of mixture, what do these ancient social divisions really mean for who we are today?